lecture of this second session of the day, and we're going to start with Dr. Dennis M. Harness from USA, the founding member of the American Council of Vedic Astrology, president of Sedona Vedic Astrology. And his lecture point is Vedic Transpersonal Counseling and the Astrologer's Shadow, Challenges in the Consulting Room.
Great. Well, I thought we would start, again, actually I want to acknowledge Gopal and Alex for inviting me to this wonderful conference. I've been doing conference planning myself for 25 years, and I can say with strong recommendation that this is amazing. We'll get a lot of our friends over from the United States in 2 years. I wanted to start by reciting the teacher-student prayer, or sometimes it's called the peace prayer. And I'll give it in Sanskrit and then also in the United States as far as English. So if you know the prayer, feel free to join me. Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahanau Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karavavahai, Tejas Vina Vadi Tumas Tuma, Vid Vasha Vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, peace, peace, peace. So I wanted to give the English version of the prayer. Let us be together, let us pray together, let us learn together. May we radiate the light of truth, may we radiate the light of life. May my teacher have a long life. I particularly like that line. And may we never denounce anyone. Om, peace, peace, peace. So my topic today is talking about Vedic transpersonal counseling, but also an emphasis on the astrologer's shadow, challenges in the consulting room. I've been doing astrological counseling for about 30 years now. I'm just finishing my Saturn return from that work. And again, I just wanted to share with you on a personal level some of the things that I've experienced over these last 3 decades. Okay, so the term shadow was popularized by Carl Jung, and it means the unconscious. And I know Lynn Bell is going to be talking about the light as well as the dark shadow, because the shadow is not just the challenges that we have in our psyche, but it's also the light, the brilliance, the gods and goddesses that reside within our being, as well as the challenges. Quite often the shadow is, in terms of the more challenging aspects of it, involve the whole principle that Freud popularized of projection, and how often whatever we see in another person quite often can be something that we're really working on within ourselves. Let's just, for example, if you experience someone that's very arrogant, prideful, quite often it's an issue that you're working on in yourself. Nietzsche was actually the great writer and philosopher, was actually who coined the term the shadow. And then Freud brought in the ego mechanisms of the defense mechanisms like projection. And then Jung took it and developed it fully. One time, Jung, in a party that he was having, some of the analysts were asking him, where does this shadow exist in the psyche? And they were kind of debating on this whole issue. And he said, don't you understand? It's the whole unconscious. It's the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's the light and the dark. This is actually a picture of my ex-wife and I. If you really want to know about the astrologer's shadow, talk to the ex-wife. She knows everything. So my guru, my Jyotish guru, is a man named Chakrapani Ulal, who was Swami Muktananda's astrologer. And he was really responsible for bringing Vedic astrology from the West. He was from Kerala. And Chakrapani once said in a lecture, which he was so deep, so profound, he said that our spiritual life does not begin until we face our shadow. I met Chakrapani back in 1980 and had a consultation with him. And he said one thing right off the bat. He said, "You will be married twice." Well, this was a little disconcerting because I hadn't even been engaged once. And then he went on to say, you know, I know your mind very well, perhaps better than you. And then he went on to say, you'll be a teacher, a counselor, a consultant, advisor, and made other predictions that were really quite profound. And so I want to honor Chakrapani because he just passed away in late October of this last year. So again, I just send my heart out to him. He was such a great teacher for me. Now, since Chakrapani, one other thing that he said, which I thought was really profound, he said that 25% of doing good astrology was technique. 25% is intuition, and 50% is the grace of God and Goddess. So he was really quite brilliant, and again, his presence, he convinced by his presence. Okay, Carl Jung, he said, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Okay, so fate, destiny, and free will. This is an area that we all need to grapple with as astrologers. And there's a karmic theory. Yogananda is a great saint who actually lived in Calcutta part of his life, and he brought really Vedic culture to the West back in 1920. He had a very interesting experience with an astrologer in his village when he was very young. The astrologer said, "You'll be married 3 times and twice a widower." He took his chart and he threw it into a fire. And he said, "The seeds of my past karma cannot grow in the fires of divine wisdom." But on 3 different occasions, his family tried to get him married. And on 3 different times, he had to refuse because he wanted to be married to Divine Mother. So the karma came, but as his chapter in Autobiography of a Yogi says, he was really interested in outwitting the stars, or we could say harmonizing with the stars. If we look at his chart, we see that Venus is in the sign of Scorpio, and which is considered somewhat, it's in its sign of detriment, some challenge. And then the dispositor of Venus is in the 8th house, Mars. The other aspect in his chart is that Saturn is the ruler of his 7th house, and it's located in Virgo in the 2nd house. And according to Varhamira, when the Lord of the 7th is a malefic and it's in the 2nd house, the person will have several mates. So again, this karma came to Yogananda, but he was able to outwit the stars. Now, karmic theory is very important to look at. And karmic theory is basically divided into a fate and free will aspect. Because to me, the whole question of fate, destiny, and free will is a paradox. There's no one answer. But sanchita karma is the accumulated karma of all of our lifetimes. So we could imagine a big bin of rice. And the prabdha karma is the karma that you're working on in this lifetime. And so it's like taking a wheelbarrow and scooping up a wheelbarrow full of rice out of this big bin and then cooking it. So that represents kind of more the fate aspect, our prabdha karma and sanchita karma. But on the free will aspect, we have what's called kriyamana karma. And kriyamana is the action that we take in this lifetime. So if we think of it like we're careening down the road of life going 80 miles an hour due to our prabdha karma. And then our kriyamana allows us to put our foot on the brake and to slow down and maybe hit the pothole at 20 miles an hour, or hopefully circumvent the pothole altogether. And again, that's our action that we're taking in this lifetime. Agama is how we see the future based on our vision. As Buddha said, as we think, we create our world. So it's having a vision of the future. It's also interesting to note that 2 karmic planets, especially in Western astrology, the North Node and the South Node of the Moon, in Vedic astrology, they're called Rahu and Ketu, and they're called the Chayagrahas, or the shadow planets, because quite often they can bring in the unconscious in a strong way. Rahu, the North Node of the Moon, is pictured sometimes as a head being pulled in a chariot by a tiger roaming the fields of insatiable desires. I always liken Rahu a little bit to the planet Uranus in terms of modern astrology. It's very unpredictable, very unusual in its experience. According to Parashara, Rahu creates smoke, has a dark body, resides in forest, engenders fear, and is area or vata in constitution. Here we have Rahu having a cigarette break. Ketu, the south node of the moon, I liken to Neptune. And so Ketu has this mystical, it's the mokshakaraka planet, the planet of spiritual liberation, but it can also bring intrigue, confusion, doubt, and some of the other aspects of the unconscious. Now, I wanted to go into this next section to what I call the 3 Ds, death, divorce, and disease, because I think these 3 areas really need to be handled very carefully as an astrologer. The first area, death, there was a very interesting book that came out a number of years ago by a great astrologer who used Western as well as Vedic techniques named Richard Hauck. And the book was called The Astrology of Death. Richard came up to me and said, will you read my book and give me an endorsement of this book? And I said, I don't even have to read the book. I can already give my endorsement. And I said, my endorsement is, this book scared the hell out of me. So in a kind of a sad aspect of that book was Richard was once asked himself, how long would he live? And I think on the interviewer, he told the interviewer, I live until I'm about 78. Well, after that book came out, about 5 years later, he passed away at the age of 55. So I always wonder, too, when we start making predictions around death, we're dealing with Lord Yama and Chitragupta. And I think this is one of the areas that I try to circumvent. If someone comes up and asks me when they're going to die, my teacher, B.V. Raman from Bangalore, said, we don't predict death or divorce or disease. Now, the second is divorce. And quite often, what I learned early on from B.V. Raman's book, Muhurta, was about using the Kuda point system. And you can get anywhere from 4 or 5 points up to 35 points of compatibility of the moon, particularly the moon nakshatra and the moon sign. And I had this one couple that came, and they only had 5 points. And so, again, I tried to be positive in the session and everything, but sure enough, about a year into their marriage, they divorced. And I'm thinking, boy, this is really a powerful technique. So I had a couple that came, and they had a session with me. They had the same moon nakshatras, same 5 points, and they'd been married 20 years. And I said, well, how have you done with this? And they said, well, we've stayed together, we have children, family is destiny. And then they said, also we've gone through 4 marital therapists. But anyway, it gave me an idea that, again, we have this free will, and who are we as astrologers to say someone for sure is going to get divorced? Even that prediction my guru Chakrapani said to me about you'll be married twice, I still wish he would have told me, just wait until I could meet my wife, Laura. I think also that marriage is a divine union. And this is Radha and Krishna, which represent the divine love of uniting our own feminine and masculine energy within ourselves. I use this next picture as a kind of asking you as an audience, where would you find love in these 3 vignettes? Would it be door number 1, door number 2, or door number 3? Any suggestions? 2? I decided it was door number 3, because this is where you would find your soulmate. Okay, that's really bad. Okay. Moving on to Z's. Again, when predicting any kind of health issue, I think we have to be careful to say it in a way and to reframe it in a way that the person does not experience fear. because I think that sometimes the predictions that we can make about disease can engender fear. So quite often if I see some health issue coming up in the chart, which of course the Rig Veda has told us to avert the danger that is yet to come, I try to present it in a positive way without cheerleading the client off a cliff. So I'll tell them, I think it's really good this year to get a full medical exam, things like that. Just common sense, in terms of health issues. This one actually, sometimes this is a patient being examined by the doctor, and he says, "No two ways about it, Mr. LeBlond. You've acquired a moon. Would you like me to remove it?" And the patient says, I don't know about that, but I think that my wife finds it very romantic. This is this chart of Albert Einstein, who had both, in Vedic astrology, both the moon and Mercury debilitated. Moon in the sign of Scorpio, Mercury in the sign of Pisces. And actually, during his moon-Mercury period, he had a nervous breakdown and had to leave his professorship position at Princeton. Yogananda himself had his guru, Sri Yukteswar, who was a great Vedic astrologer, amazing Vedic astrologer. And Sri Yukteswar saw something in Yogananda's chart about his Jupiter and his liver, because Jupiter associated with liver. And in Yogananda's chart, the Jupiter is with Mars in the sign of Pisces, aspected by Saturn. So during his Mars-Jupiter period, his guru said, there could be some problem with the liver issue. So I want you to wear this particular bangle. I want you to do certain meditation, certain yoga principles, some other remedial measures. And sure enough, at the appointed time that his guru said this, he did become ill. And yet, he was able to do these practices, and the illness only lasted a few weeks. And so Yogananda, his guru said, this illness of your liver could have lasted for 6 months and possibly killed you, but by doing these remedial measures, you were able to outwit the stars. I used to work at the Facial Pain Research Center. I did a lot of work with chronic pain. Okay, acupuncture in the rear, okay. And so a lot of my clients, I would look at their charts as well. Now, during this time, I have to tell this quick story. I'll make it quick. I had an assistant professor position. I was only working a couple of days a week. I was trying to build an astrological practice. And I saw an ad in the paper. It said, "Wanted, zoo attendant." This is at the San Francisco Zoo. So I went down, talked to the owner of the zoo, and he says, well, it's not really an attendant we need. What happened is our gorilla died. And it's going to take us about 6 months to get a new gorilla in from Africa. So what we would like you to do is get in this gorilla suit and pretend you're a gorilla, because what good is a zoo without a gorilla? So I'm thinking to myself, this is really maybe a good job. I get 3 meals a day, all the bananas I want, So I get into this gorilla suit, and I start dancing, moving around, and the kids are clapping, everybody's happy. Again, I'm thinking, if I really do this good job, they'll hire me. So I see a rope with a tire on it, and I jump on this rope, and I'm moving, higher and higher, until all of a sudden the rope snaps, and I go and I land right into the lion's den. Okay, I got a lot of Leo in both my Western and Vedic charts, but still, I'm screaming, help, help, somebody help me. And the lion lunges at me, and he says, you better shut up or you're going to get us both fired. Only at the San Francisco Zoo. Now, this next part of my lecture, I want to talk about challenging client styles, because these are some of the times the clients where it can really be a long hour when you're working with a client, for example, that's the skeptic. And this is quite often a client that will like to test you. And even if you make some correct prediction or something, they still want to test or confound you. Quite often this can happen when you're getting an astrological session as a gift. Somebody's giving it as a gift, for your birthday, and they don't even want to come to you. So again, sometimes with skeptics, I find these are the longest hours of consultations I've ever done. Now, the professional client is in the Sedona. We have everything. Sedona is, known for its mystical things. So a lot of the clients will have had a tarot reading. They'll have had their astrology chart done several times. And, there in Sedona, the car mechanic is a psychic, okay? The manicurist reads palms, And so again, clients will come sometimes and have, a lot of experiences. The next client is called Rescue Me. And these clients, this is actually Sun in the 12th house in Leo. These clients, again, will sometimes come and they'll really want you to rescue them, to provide them with some magic pill or wave a wand that everything's going to be okay. And usually at the end of the session, you'll feel really drained. And so one of the things that I like to do with clients like this is to really try to motivate them to take an active role in the healing process, and rather than being just a passive recipient of a cure. The next client style is the victim, and they can come and feel that somehow they're being punished for their karma in their chart. And so again, with this kind of client, we try to really empower them, try to help them let go of victim consciousness, and again, be kind of a spiritual warrior. The most difficult clients that I've ever worked with in my life have been borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. And quite often, if you've ever worked with a client like this, one day you're God or goddess, and the next day you're the devil. I think Jung said it very well. He said, when somebody makes you the God, the devil's not far behind. Or as I like to say, you become God, and then the next day Godzilla. Again, I think one of the things with borderline personality disorder, it's really good to have a licensed psychotherapist that you can refer these clients to, because again, they could be a really difficult situation. They get into a defense mechanism called splitting, where everything is black and white. There's no gray. This is actually the astrologer dealing with a borderline client. Now, one of the most unique types of clients that I've ever worked with is multiple personality disorder. And the thing that I really love, though, even though it's difficult to work with people that have multiple personality disorder, the thing that I really love is they like to pay 3 times. Now we get into the last part of the talk, Vedic transpersonal counseling. Transpersonal just means going beyond the ego, going beyond the persona. And if we think about the 4 schools of psychology, the first was the psychoanalytic that Freud popularized. Then we had the behavioral school of B.F. Skinner and John Watson, which is more about behaviorism. Then the 3rd school was humanistic astrology, which we had people like Carl Rogers. And then the 4th school is transpersonal psychology, which Carl Jung really took that and moved things beyond the ego. This is one of Jung's quotes. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. I think one of the things that we do as astrologers, very similar to psychotherapists, is we make the unconscious conscious. And I've always said that the main difference between a psychotherapist and an astrologer is astrologers are paid to talk. Psychotherapists are paid to listen. Nietzsche, who I talked about, who coined the term the shadow, he once said that man's shadow, I thought, is his vanity. And I think this is one of the areas that we as astrologers really need to work on, is sense of our own narcissism, our own grandiosity, our own ego. I call this, the last part of this talk is on developing what I call chart-side manner. These are different aspects that I think are important. The first is to be humble and compassionate. Again, I think humility is a strong, being confident but also being humble, to me, is a great combination. The second is being fully present, listening, and in Vedic astrology, the use of omens. Because, you know, the practice of Vedic astrology was in the jungles of Kerala. That's one of the original aspects. So they could actually observe omens and things like that. I think it's always good if you're an astrologer to at least have a window outside of your office so you can observe different aspects going on in nature. I think one of the things that we need to as astrologers is to reconnect with nature. The third is helping the client to make the unconscious a conscious, as we said, Carl Jung's idea, and then to explore potentials or cycles they're in. Lastly, we want to think to make to be choice revealers, choice makers. The client can come to their own, into making their life. So much the power in the client's hands, astrologers being the omniscient. That's my backyard in Sedona. Sedona, at the end of November Astrology Conference, I'm hoping. As I mentioned, more active role in the healing. I call this kind of the genetic code. So, map quest to God. And besides astrological, the state of consciousness, great gifts that we give to our. Give them the sense, always leave our session with this faith and hope for the instead of engendering fear. And finest ways, nature. So thank you very much.